Every single person you know is getting wildly rich off of real estate except for you. And you're worried that if you don't buy a couple rental properties here in the next few years, you're going to get left behind. Let's talk about that. My name's Christopher. Welcome back to Venrate. In this video, my plan is to neither persuade nor dissuade you from buying a rental property, but hopefully to tell you some of the things that you should think about that nobody else will. While it feels like the end-all be-all of the investment world, there's really nothing special about owning investment properties. Everybody wants to make it seem like you will never achieve true financial wealth unless you own at least one house, but preferably several. Everything that makes the real estate world seem amazing can really be attributed just to the power of leverage. When you're levered 4-to-1 on an asset that's collateralized by what is basically a commodity and something that everybody needs, of course it's going to seem like a good deal. Based on long-term historical averages, the housing market tends to barely outpace inflation, with inflation being around 3.25% and the housing market being about 4.5%. If this surprises you or is less than what you would have suspected, you should probably do a lot more research before trying to buy a rental property. Leverage is a catalyst. It makes whatever was already going to happen faster. When the housing market is going up, the leverage makes you look like a genius. And when the housing market is going down, the underwater loan makes you look like a fool. Leverage in the housing market has been normalized mostly out of necessity, as rising home prices mean that the multiple of average incomes to average home prices has decreased, in addition to the fact that the average person has had much more involvement in the stock market in the past couple decades. As the average person invested more and more in the markets, they realized that they would rather pay the home financing interest fees than take their money out of the markets, where it's historically earning an average of 9.5% per year. While all this was going on, we also had the historical anomaly of zero interest rate policies for almost the past 20 years. While zero interest rate policy was controversial in the financial world, it was great for people that wanted to be landlords. It's really easy to look like a genius when you've lapped up cheap houses that were on sale after the great financial crisis at interest rates that were extremely low due to zero interest rate policies and sold them out or rented them out to renters who were paying all of the interest and a good amount of the principal for you. But that's an anomaly. That's not normally how this works. That whole system is based off of the exploitation of those who haven't saved up enough money to put a down payment down on a home yet. Which is fine. That's a normal, financial phenomenon. Nothing wrong with it, but call a spade a spade. That's what it is. The thing is, that's much easier to do when the interest as a percentage of the total loan payments is microscopic. It's really easy to do when you're only paying 2.25% interest on that loan. Now that the average mortgage rate in the US is closer to 6%, it's almost impossible to make that model work. Feel free to reference these amortization tables that I put together for financing a $400,000 home at various interest rates. You'll notice that at 6%, you're going to pay half of the home's value in interest over the first 10 years. It's really hard to find a renter that's going to be able to pay that much, let alone the price of property taxes and upkeep. If you're even considering buying a rental property, and if it's your first, you need to be pouring through amortization tables on a regular basis to make sure that this is actually a sound investment for you. Luckily for you, Venrate.com has some of the best amortization tables in the world, and if you don't know what an amortization table is, you are officially forbidden from buying a rental property until you do. The argument could definitely be made that we've underbuilt houses for so long that supply has been constrained, and now even as interest rates go up, there's so few houses available that the prices are going to remain consistent. I think an equally strong argument could be made that given the demographic situation of the United States, the baby boomers are by far the largest population, and they own over half of all of the real estate equity in the United States, which is crazy to think about. But that is more of an argument to be made about the prices of the real estate market. Some people will say that it doesn't really matter what price you buy your home at as long as you can intermittently use the rental property as your primary residence and as long as you feel like you got a good deal at the time that you bought it, which is true to an extent. But I think people grossly underestimate their capacity for their financial situation to change overnight. I think a lot of people don't realize how quickly things change when you are levered 4-to-1 on an investment that's dropped $70,000 since the point that you purchased it, and suddenly you have to sell. You have to take that loss. You have to come up with $70,000 to make the situation whole. It's not going to come from the bank. I can guarantee you that. The other group of people that I run into on a fairly consistent basis is the type of person that says, well, I understand what you're saying, but those risks don't apply to me because I own all of my rental properties outright. This is equally bad. This is equally bad of a financial decision. You have to have debt for this to work. That's the only thing that makes this setup viable, is if you can have leverage on your investment and make somebody else pay the interest. You have to have a low enough interest rate for that to work, but also you have to have debt, and a lot of it, to make that setup work. If you own all of your properties outright, you have to do the math and find out what your return on invested capital, or ROIC, is for the portfolio. Because I guarantee you, well, I can't guarantee for compliance reasons, but I feel very strongly that if you add up all of the expenses and everything that you're putting into the house, subtract everything out from the amount of rent that you're getting in and find what your profit is as a percentage of all of the equity in all of your houses, I find for a lot of people, it's about 1 to 2%. And not only that, but you're spending all of this time and effort to be a landlord and to find contractors and to make repairs and to get things done. And a lot of people do this in their later stages of life too. I find a lot of people, 50s, 60s, even 70s, I don't know why you would want to be a landlord. If you're in your 30s and you're in a blessed financial situation and you buy a duplex and just want to rent out the other side, sure, whatever. That's a much less harmful setup, right? Because it's something that you're kind of already going to be in. You kind of have skin in the game anyway. I find much less fault with that. The thing that I'm specifically finding fault with is the small but very loud group of people on YouTube that wants to make you think that the only way that you're ever going to advance in life is if you own not just your own house, but many other people's houses as well. And I can't stress enough how much of a headache it is to own one house, let alone many. It's always something. It's the roof, it's the HVAC, tenant changes oil in the driveway and it spills all over and stains the concrete. It's always something. Not to mention there's not always going to be somebody in the rental property. I think a lot of people underestimate vacancy time. How long it takes to find a new tenant, to vet them, to make sure they're not going to destroy the place, make sure they're going to pay on time, make sure they're going to pay consistently. It takes a lot of time and money to do all these things. And then it's hilarious because financial influencers will turn around and say it's passive income. It's very active income. It's extremely active income. I get people coming to me and bragging all the time about how they're making $10,000 after tax, after fees, after upkeep on, a equity portfolio in real estate where they've got 5 different houses at $200,000 each. And it's like, well, you're making 1%. You know what's passive income? Stocks and bonds. There are a lot of situations where you can make the math for the owner-renter setup work, but almost all of them are dependent on extremely low interest rates. And I think that for the most part, this is a speculation, I'll admit that, but I would guess that for the most part, the times of low interest rates are going to be largely behind us. There are a lot of reasons for that. National debt comes to mind, as well as the fact that inflation is probably going to be structural for the next couple decades, at least, maybe the next generation. And until we get back to those times of very low interest rates, some might say artificially low interest rates, it's going to make it very difficult to justify the math behind the average person shoehorning themselves into being a landlord. And it's no dig against landlords. One, I just think a lot of people don't realize that's what owning rental properties means, is you're a landlord. I feel like people call it, I'm a rental property mogul to make it sound a little bit more refined. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I do think it is important to not kid yourself about what you're going into, especially if you're not somebody who's already kind of inclined to this sort of an investment. As I alluded to in the beginning of this video, there's actually a pretty hot debate in the finance community about whether it's better to own or rent your primary residence. In fact, a lot of the numbers would point to the fact that it is better to rent as long as you can have the discipline to take the money that you save and invest it at a decent rate of return, which most people don't have the discipline to save that money, nor the wherewithal to invest it at a decent return. The other thing is that a lot of people, if they're saving money on the mortgage, they're just going to rent a bigger, nicer house and get the payments to be equal, roughly equal. Most people, again, don't have the discipline. And if that's you, and that is most people, then yes, it definitely is going to be better to own. I do want to emphasize, though, that if the financial community is divided about whether or not you should own one home, I think you should think long and hard about whether you want to own 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 homes. Luckily, Venrate.com is here to help you do the math and find out how many homes are right for you. Be sure to go to Venrate.com to check out the world's best financial calculators and planning tools.